Hello, BookTube, and welcome to ShakeTube 2017. That's a uh, very informal Shakespeare read-along conducted by Lukash at Lukash's Books and Curtis at Curtis Books and Films, uh, in which they picked a little more than a dozen Shakespeare plays that we'll be reading one a week until the beginning of December, uh, with the structure being that you read the play during the week and make a video at the end of the week and make a video on the weekend. Uh, and I like that. It's a very open, flexible thing, which allows for a lot of people to join in, which I think is a large part of why so many people have. And I'm hoping that it serves as a model for other similar read-alongs in BookTube's future. uh, and this time along, we're up to a classic tragedy of Shakespeare's, Othello. Uh, when I say classic, I mean that in the last 50 years or so, it has become absolutely standard to group four of Shakespeare's tragedies together: Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, and Othello. And long before that, Othello was the cream of the stage and a surefire crowd pleaser. And uh, I'm sure that you've encountered it in school, so you know the story of it's about a Moorish Venetian general named Othello who becomes insanely jealous at the urging of the villain of the piece, Iago, becomes absurdly jealous of his fair wife Desdemona, and eventually strangles her to death out of jealousy, and then kills himself when faced with the penalty of the law in Venice, and it's always grouped there. Bantam, uh, Mentor, Penguin, you name it. The Norton Anthology, it's always grouped those four tragedies together, and I do not understand that. I have never understood the appeal of Othello. I have never understood it. I've never understood why people consider it to be a good play, much less a great play. It's and the main reason for that is because, unlike so much else in Shakespeare, Shakespeare can stretch a point. He can stretch a blanket as well as anybody. He knows, especially in the middle and late part of his career, how much he can get away with because of genius. Uh, but even so, even given that latitude, Othello is the major Shakespeare play that makes the least sense in terms of plot. The plot doesn't hang together at all. Nothing in the play makes sense, and that drives me nuts. Now, that you might not be that kind of reader, um, and it certainly doesn't matter in a live theater performance. But on the page, reading it as we do for ShakeTube, it drives me nuts. The play takes place in almost no time, and the time, unlike in a lot of Shakespeare plays, is clearly demarcated. So there's no wiggle room. We know for sure how little time has passed since Othello and Desdemona first seriously contemplated each other as mates, since they married, since they had sex. We know the time frame here. The idea that Othello could be moved in any way to the feelings that Iago moves him to is absurd. The idea that Iago would want to move him to those feelings is absurd. The idea that any of Iago's compatriots would agree or would be a part of it or wouldn't see it for what it was, this and that doesn't even get me started on Desdemona, who is not just sheepish but a sheep throughout the play, a disgrace when seen alongside some of the other women that Shakespeare has created for the stage. The 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 timing of it, the wording of it, the psychology of it, the motivations of it, none of it makes any sense. None of it does. And it doesn't, for me, it doesn't completely matter how gorgeous, what kind of gorgeous poetry you drape over something, if the something doesn't make any sense. I had this very discussion years and years and years ago, more long before most of you were born, with an actor, during the brief time when I lived in Manhattan. We had this discussion at lunch, and I was going on and on. And unlike now, I'm not going to bore you, but unlike now, I was giving chapter and verse. I was doing, you know, acts and scenes and lines and pointing out the problems with each one of them. When finally he reached across the little table at the restaurant where we were, and he said, "Darling, in only a month, I'm going to pay my mortgage with what I hope is a long run as Iago. Kindly shut your mouth, or I'll stick a hat pin in your hand. I don't have to worry about that now. Uh, so I'm not going to belabor the play much. It has beautiful passages, absolutely, and despite what you might think from the comments that I just made, I strongly urge you to go and see it. Absolutely, go and see it. And there've been a couple of really effective performances on camera, so you don't need to go anywhere to see it. You can see it on YouTube, I'm sure, uh, and see some good stuff in it. But the one piece of deep theorizing, the thing that drove my friend crazy, was the thing that broke the straw that broke the camel's back for him, is the theory that I've always had as to why this play has always been so fascinating. I think that the source of its popularity is deeply unhealthy and always has been. I think that the source of its popularity is also the source of its fascination for Shakespeare to write it in the first place. Uh, there's a lot of deeply unhealthy stuff going on in this play, and I think that speaks to its popularity in a lot of ways that I don't like. I don't even like examining them. The climax of this play is a, a big, stupid, emotional black man strangling a pure, innocent white woman to death. And that would be one thing. It would be one thing, maybe, if the play actually held together, if the play actually brought you to that moment. I mean, tragedies do that, right? The even going back as far as Sophocles, in Sophocles and Euripides, the play will bring you organically to horrifying moments of cannibalism or slaughter that you can see coming after a while, but there's no way to avoid them. Like the tragedy in a dream. There's no way you can stop it from happening. In Othello, at every point, when you're reading it, maybe not when you're seeing it in the theater, but when you're reading it, at every point, you're sitting there saying, okay, but why? All right, yes, okay, that's beautifully written, but why? Why is this happening? Okay, fine, but this guy's a general. Surely he can, if it's so obvious what a conniving weasel Iago is, why can't he see it? And you might say, well, the reason he can't see it is because the seed of jealousy has already been planted there. But no, no, he hasn't known this woman long enough. Unless he's a maniac, in which case he'd have been died in a brawl long since we meet him. I think there's something unhealthy going on here, and I think that if you delve deeply into historical essays, into historical research about Shakespeare's own time, what it would have been like for Shakespeare's audience to see not just a black man as a lead character in a drama, but a black man as a general in a lead character in a drama. I think that crinkling sound you hear is Frida going nuts on some cardboard. But, I think there are psychological things going on in what Shakespeare was doing to please his audience that we don't want to think about in the modern day, and that most audiences haven't wanted to think about. It's one of those things, one of those tragedies of Shakespeare where you don't really want to think about why it's so effective. I could make the same case about Coriolanus in a very different, or Titus Andronicus. Oh my God, Titus Andronicus is another perfect example where it's definitely effective, especially if you watch it in person. But you don't really want to dig too deep into why it's effective. But cod philosophizing aside, this is yet another example of occasionally in ShakeTube there have been examples where the play just didn't do it for me. I know that sounds very Iowa Writers Workshop. I'm sorry, this just didn't work for me. But in this case, it's true. Othello has always been a bone of contention for me. I have never understood why all the major anthologies and all of the academic groupings and all the teachings and whatnot don't omit it and include Julius Caesar instead. Julius Caesar is a much stronger play in almost every way, except that it doesn't have that the climax at the end. its climax is in the middle. And it's not quite the same kind of climax, but I'm not sure we'd want it to be. I, I don't know. I don't know. One way or another, for ShakeTube 2017, I went back at it again with a completely open mind. In fact, I didn't even use any of the versions that I have here. I downloaded a clean copy from Project Gutenberg and read it again with a completely open mind, and it just, maybe it's not possible for my mind to be completely open on this play anymore. I don't understand why it's venerated. I don't understand why people don't find it. I don't understand why when people talk about problematic Shakespeare plays, they talk about The Merchant of Venice and not Othello. I don't understand that. I don't understand why. We went over this with The Merchant of Venice when we were talking about that. It's a totally losing argument for me to make. I don't make it in public anymore anyway, but just between us, I don't actually think that there's a whole lot of what we'd actually consider anti-Semitism operating in the plot of The Merchant of Venice. I think that Shakespeare clearly gives us other sources of motivation in that play, and then plays the thing out that way. I used to make this argument much more readily. The massive showstopper of a contention that I used to say was that The Merchant of Venice would work just fine if Shylock were Protestant. But that doesn't fly anymore. The Merchant of Venice has been enshrined as a perfect example in everybody's mind of a great author being an anti-Semite. And yet, Othello almost gets a free pass for much worse things that are going on. There's a case to be made. You could make a case that The Merchant of Venice is not about anti-Semitism. I could make that case, and it would be very solid. It might win some of you over. You can't make a case that Othello isn't about race. And race in the most unhealthy way. A major black character who is invented to fail. Anyway, I went into it with an open mind. I was hoping that I would see things in it, because ShakeTube has been changing some of my perceptions, and that's been great. It didn't happen with the reading, so I'm going to watch your videos. That also has been a great source of education for me in this whole series. So I'm going to watch your videos and see if any of that dislodges any of this. The word is dislike. I dislike this play. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. So I'm I'm gonna watch your videos, but I don't think I'm gonna be convinced. I don't think Othello is for me, and that isn't true about our next play. Our next play, I believe, is King Lear, and to paraphrase a New Yorker cartoon, God help us all. So I will see you then. We will reconvene on a windswept moor. Thank you, BookTube.